Often in life, we find ourselves going through moments of waiting, uncertainty, and even despair. We have all been there, wondering when those blessings that we so long for will arrive. Maybe it's an answer to a prayer, a solution to a problem, or that dream that seems so distant. It is in those moments when we most need to remember something fundamental. God has a plan for each of us, and everything happens in its perfect time. But what does this really mean? How can we find peace and hope in the midst of waiting? In this video, we will explore this concept in depth. I will take you on a journey of understanding and reflection, where we will discover how faith in the time of God can transform our perspective and our life. Prepare to immerse yourself in a message full of hope, patience, and faith in the divine plan. At the end, my wish is that you find a new way of seeing the wait, that you can recognize how God's blessings manifest in your life, and how everything, absolutely everything, happens at the right time. First, let's think about our lives. We have all experienced moments in which we expect something with all our strength. A new job, a relationship, the solution to a problem. That wait can be exhausting and sometimes desperate. Now, imagine what it means to trust that this moment will come in the perfect time, not in ours, but in God's. Why is it so important to understand and accept God's time? The Bible is full of stories that teach us about this truth. Let's take the example of Abraham. God promised him that he would be the father of a great nation, but both he and his wife Sarah were old and had no children. Despite the circumstances, Abraham trusted God's promise. Many years passed before Sarah gave birth to Isaac, the promised son. Imagine the patience and faith needed to wait so long. This story shows us that God's time is not our time. Sometimes, what seems like a delay is really part of God's perfect plan. He has an eternal perspective, while we only see a small fragment. It's like watching a magnificent painting through a slit. We see a part, but God sees the whole picture. Another powerful story is that of Moses. He was called by God to free the Israelites from slavery in Egypt. However, before fulfilling that mission, he spent 40 years in the desert taking care of sheep. Can you imagine what he must have felt? He probably wondered if his life would have a significant purpose. But those years were not in vain. God was shaping his character, preparing him for the monumental task ahead. Moses' wait was not easy, but it was crucial for his development as a leader and as a man of faith. What can we learn from these stories? First, patience is key. Like Abraham, we must trust in God's promises, even when it seems that nothing is happening. Second, waiting times are moments of preparation. Like Moses, you may be going through a similar period now. You may not see the purpose yet, but God is working on you, preparing you for something bigger. And third, we must trust in the complete plan. Although we do not always understand why things do not happen as we want, we must remember that God sees the full picture. By understanding these truths, we can begin to see our hopes with a new perspective, not as obstacles, but as part of the perfect plan that God has for our lives. We have already talked about what it means to trust in the time of God. Now it is time to take this concept to our daily life, because to understand in theory is one thing, but to apply it in everyday life can be quite a challenge. How can we really live with the confidence that God will bless us in his perfect time? First, keep a positive perspective. It is natural to feel frustrated or discouraged when things do not go as we want, or when it seems that time stops. But our perceptions are limited. We cannot always see what God is doing behind the scenes. It is like reading an exciting book, but only one page at a time. If the current page is difficult, it does not mean that the story will not have a satisfactory ending. We just haven't gotten there yet. Remember that God is writing your story, and each chapter has a purpose. Trust that the best is yet to come. Second, cultivate patience and hope. This is not always easy, but there are tools that can help us. Prayer, for example, connects us to God. Talking to him about our fears, desires, and frustrations not only brings us closer to his presence, but also gives us peace. Meditation in the scriptures can also be a constant source of strength. Verses like, rejoice in hope, show patience in suffering, persevere in prayer, remind us that patience is not to wait passively, but to do so with a positive attitude, knowing that God is working in our favor. Third, rethink waiting as a time of growth. Instead of seeing it as an obstacle, consider an opportunity. Perhaps God is preparing you for something greater than you imagine. This is a time to strengthen your skills, develop your character, or even explore new passions. Perhaps now you do not see the purpose of this time, but when the blessings arrive, you will realize that you were being molded to receive them. Fourth, surround yourself with support and wisdom. In the moments of waiting, it is easy to feel alone, but you do not have to face it in isolation. Look for a community that shares your faith and encourages you. Conversations with friends, family, or support groups can be a constant reminder that you are not alone. Also, you can find inspiration in books, sermons, or biblical studies. Remember, just as a fire needs wood to stay lit, our faith needs the support of others to stay strong. Finally, learn to recognize and appreciate small blessings. Sometimes, we are so focused on the goal that we forget the blessings that surround us every day. A sunrise, a smile, a moment of tranquility. These small blessings are signs that God is present, even in the simplest details of our life. When we are grateful for the little, our heart opens to receive the great. Living with the confidence that God has a perfect time for everything is not an easy path, but with these practices we can transform our wait into an experience of growth, gratitude, and faith. Everything we live has a purpose. God is working on every detail, even in the moments when we do not understand it. Trust, because His time is perfect. Throughout history, both in the Bible and in everyday life, we find powerful examples of people who trusted in God's time and saw His work manifest perfectly. A classic example is Abraham and Sarah. God promised them a son, but years passed without that promise being fulfilled. They could have surrendered or stopped believing, but finally, in the perfect time of God, Isaac was born. This example reminds us that although our wait seems endless, God always fulfills what He promises. Another inspiring testimony is that of Joseph, who was sold as a slave by his own brothers and spent years in prison for a crime he did not commit. He could have been filled with resentment and lost hope, but Joseph trusted that God had a plan. At the right time, he was elevated to the position of governor in Egypt, saving his family and an entire nation from starvation. The story of Joseph teaches us that even the most difficult moments can be part of a greater purpose. In today's times, we also see stories of faith in action. People who waited years for a job, a health care, or a family reconciliation, and who at the right time received answers that exceeded their expectations. Like the case of a mother who prayed tirelessly for the restoration of the relationship with her son, and after years of distance, managed to embrace him again thanks to a series of events that only God could have orchestrated. Each of these testimonies reminds us that the waiting time is never wasted time. God does not arrive before or after, but exactly when it is necessary. These examples inspire us to keep our faith alive and to trust that He is always working, even when we do not see it. If they could see His fidelity, you will do it too. Throughout this message, we have explored the transforming power of trusting in the time of God. We have seen how the stories of the Bible, the examples of everyday life, and the waiting times in our own lives have a deep purpose. Waiting is not a punishment, but a preparation, an opportunity to grow in faith, patience, and hope. Remember that every moment, even the most difficult, is in the hands of God who loves you deeply and who works for your good. Trust that His plans are perfect, even when you cannot fully understand them. Waiting is part of the process, and blessings will come in due time. If this message resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear these words. Leave us your thoughts in the comments, and tell me how you are choosing to trust in the time of God in your life. Together, we can build a community of faith and hope that inspires others to persevere. Thank you for joining us on this journey, and remember, everything happens in the perfect time of God.